In this module, we will review some concepts from probability that are going to be critical for understanding many of the concepts in advanced thermodynamics. Okay, so in this video, we'll just kind of review some basic definitions in the field of probability. In general, probability is the field that focuses on trying to describe how likely is it for an event to occur. So probability describes how likely it is for an event to occur. Alright? And so to provide an example of this, consider the case where you're dealing with a scenario in which there are only two outcomes that can occur. So let's consider an event that can lead to an outcome of type A or type B. And so some real-life example, or a real-life example of this, would be the flipping of a coin. Because in this case, when you flip, a penny, a dime, or a quarter, and they land on the ground, there's only really two options in the direction that they can land. Either the heads portion of the coin is face up, or the tails portion is face up. Okay? Alright, now to be more formal about describing this sort of scenario, or to generalize it, if we have a scenario where it's not just two outcomes that can occur, but there are n outcomes, right? And then for scenario A, we would say that n sub A of the outcomes are the scenario A result, and n sub B of the outcomes are scenario B. Then the way that we would describe or define the probabilities would be like this. Probabilities of A or B occurring. So we would say that the probability that outcome A occurs would be n sub A divided by the total n. And the probability that outcome B occurs is n sub B divided by the total n. Right, so essentially it's just looking at the fraction of A outcomes relative to the entire number of outcomes. Right, so something you've seen before. In general, your probabilities will range from 0 to 1, right? That's how fractions work. And in the special case that the probability for some outcome I is exactly equal to 1, so it has a 100% chance of occurring, then we say that that outcome is deterministic. Right, so if something has a 100% chance to occur, then it's known as being deterministic. Right? So those are some just the basic definition of probability and how to calculate probability. Some other important definitions that are going to be central to understanding the upcoming discussions are the description of something being mutually exclusive. So that just means that the occurrence of one type of outcome precludes the occurrence of any other type of outcome occurring. So for instance, if outcome A occurs, if outcome A were mutually exclusive, then that would mean that outcome B would not be able to occur. So occurrence of all others. The phrase collectively exhaustive just means that a collection of a group of outcomes, um, that group would be collectively exhaustive if it contains the entire set of possibilities of outcomes that can occur. So a group of outcomes contains entire set of possibilities if an outcome is independent, that means it's not correlated to any other outcome or doesn't depend on any other outcome. So here, the occurrence of outcome A, if that occurrence were independent, that would mean that the probability that outcome B occurs would not be affected by outcome A occurring. That's what we mean by independent. The last thing I want to define is something called the multiplicity. So this is something that's going to show up quite a lot in this course. Okay. So all this is, it just says it's the number of ways that different outcomes can occur. Okay? And so, in general, in this course, I'm going to abbreviate multiplicity as this omega. And the way that you would calculate multiplicity is, let's say you have some scenario 1, some scenario 2, and scenario 3 that make up your set of available possible scenarios. So these n's represent the number of ways outcome I can occur. Right? And so the multiplicity, in order to calculate the total number of ways that the outcome can occur, you would just take the product of all of the different numbers of outcomes, right? And so the way that we abbreviate it would be using this pi symbol, right? And so the multiplicity would just be the product of all the different numbers of outcomes that can occur, right? And so this is going to be something that we're going to practice calculating coming up.